first glance, a very straightforward burial site where this human being has passed on and has been put into, the earth like a traditional ground burial. If we look even further, we see that he's been excavated by this anthropomorphized patch of earth, this grass that actually takes on human form. What I want the viewer to get out of this is this understanding that perhaps that this anthropomorphized figure from the earth is actually a copy of what, this shell of the human being that's passed on, and that he's experiencing this self-reflection of what he was and now what he's become after he's been put into the earth. If the viewer takes the time to actually keep looking in his line of sight, he realizes that he's actually not alone, that he's accompanied by this mythological creature. And for me, this is actually the god Thoth that I discovered within my research in Egyptian mythology. Egyptians believe that this deity is actually half ibis and half man. And for me to discover this being, this god, was actually very serendipitous, because I actually grew up with a lot of birds in my life, and I've always felt them to be my spirit animal in a sense. And if anyone in here actually knows my very early works, even going as far back as high school or college, I had a lot of birds in my work where I would create these bird hybrid self-portraits. Bird-human self-portraits. And here we see that Thoth is half bird, half man, and I just felt that that seemed incredibly appropriate. And Thoth is believed to be the god that keeps the universe in balance, as well as the guide to the dead and the afterlife. So again, he was specifically chosen for this piece that I created, that once this figure, the soul of this figure realizes that Thoth is present, that there is this consoling that occurs within the piece, and that he's there and he's actually mourning as if this is an actual funeral scene about this figure that's passed on. Within my work, I always, especially within the mythologies I create, I really love to think of there being a sort of dialogue between my characters. And it always finds its way almost every time into the titles for my work. And for example, for this one, I imagine Thoth telling the soul that's passed on, not for long, my forlorn, it won't be long till you're on to your next life. And that in your state of being the most sad and alone that you can be once you've passed, actually that you will then go on to your next life, and it is actually not over. Something, lastly, that I'd like to point out about this piece that I think is important for the rest of the exhibition is that after completion, and I stood back to really look at this piece and take it in, I realized that I do what I always do, which is this repetitive pattern work that you can see both in the splats of paint and as well as with the blades of grass and the feathers with the bird. And in particular with the feathers and the blades of grass, I feel that there is a repetition that happens that I find to be just so magical, in the sense that this happens around us every day in real life, where there's pattern and that repetition of something happening. For me, when I'm physically actually making the work, it becomes very meditative and cathartic. And I actually go into this meditative state where I can actually keep on thinking about what the work is actually about, and really just have time with it and get into this flow and into this other zone. Just speaking formally about that kind of pattern work, for me, I feel like it almost becomes like music. So that I really like for people, when they view the work, to not only get a sense of like all the other formal aspects, but to almost get this, besides the poetry, to also get this almost musical sense from the work. I'd like to draw everyone's attention actually to the sculpture now that's right behind this piece, the helmet work, entitled Closer to Thoth. I knew that once I had this opportunity to create this exhibition, that again I wasn't going to abandon my usual conceptual framework for my pieces of art. I wanted to also not abandon my usual processes, although I discovered new materials and new techniques. I knew that I wanted to do what I always do, in that I work both 2- and 3-dimensionally, cyclically within my normal processes in the studio. And I feel that it is just wonderful as an artist to be able to work as a multidisciplinary artist, because I think the materials really speak to one another and inform one another. But even more importantly for me, I feel as though when the viewer, as in right behind you, the piece, The Sole Purpose, if the viewer realizes the helmets in that piece and the armor, it's as if it's been plucked out and then brought into the gallery space for the viewer to have another sensory experience for the piece. So then it almost lets you get a sense of the temperature and the smell and the feel of the material that's actually in the drawing that I'm trying to create. So within this piece, I believe that it actually operates as 3 different types of objects simultaneously. One, it is a talisman, 2, it's a crown, and then lastly, it operates as an actual helmet, like armor. Crowns are traditionally worn as a symbol of power, but they also symbolize the idea of immortality and celebrating the afterlife. Also, talisman is something that you wear that really possesses a magical power that protects you from evil as well. And lastly, it operating also as a helmet, as in worn with armor, I feel that it seems all the more appropriate for my exhibition because I so badly wanted this show to also communicate to the viewer that I'm also speaking of personal battles that we all experience throughout our lives. And I mean that, again, very symbolically and metaphorically, not that we all go off to war and we are in the army, but obviously that we each have our own personal, individual, unique battles that we all go through. Although they may seem to have parallels with one another. As human beings, we all experience very similar things, but nonetheless, they're unique to our own experiences that we have. This piece, again, just as in with the repetitive mark making in this work, was extremely meditative for me as well because everything is made from scratch and hand stamped and assembled by hand, and it just became a very, very meditative, cathartic process for me as well within this work. For the title, Closer to Thoth, I was thinking that it kind of operated and could be read on 2 different levels, where one, perhaps if you're wearing it as a helmet, it's suggesting that you're that much closer to Thoth, this guide of the dead, and that you're that much closer to death within whatever it is that you're experiencing in this war or battle that you're in. And then lastly, that even something as familiar as the yarmulke that a Jewish man wears, that is believed to bring them closer to God, that perhaps this is some sort of accessory as well for, my idea of spirituality that brings you closer to Thoth or, a higher being, a cosmic higher being. And I'd like to now direct everyone's attention to this work, Have Faith in the Umbros. So, in this work, the viewer is presented with one of my other characters that I created for this exhibition that I discovered throughout my research, particularly in Greek mythology, and it is the Ouroboros, which is the snake that eats its own tail. And Ouroboros actually translates into he who eats the tail. Traditionally, it's an image of the snake literally eating its own tail, which then becomes this circle figure. And it symbolizes endless life and rebirth, eternal life, and this cycle that we live, that we are born, we die, and then we are reborn. For me, the snake and discovering the Ouroboros could not have been more, perfect for my idea for my show, because the snake, for me, I had always thought of as